Hello, welcome to That's English.
Hello. Last time we heard the story of Billy the Hat. Do you remember? He had been in prison and had become interested in books.
Today, we're going to find out what sort of books the British like reading. First, we asked people, do you read a lot?
I don't read books that often, and most of the books that I do read are for my study. Books to do with economics and management, I'm afraid.
I like reading fiction, but while I'm studying, I don't have much time to read.
I used to borrow all my books from the library, but then I worked in a bookshop, and since then, I always buy new books, because they're nicer.
I never read books.
I like big, fat novels that I can take my time reading.
I like big, fat novels that I can take my time reading. Que pueda pasar mucho tiempo leyendo.
I'm just the same. The fatter the better. Cuanto más largas, mejor. I can spend several weeks reading the same book.
Now, what sort of books do other British people like to read? Here are several people talking about the books they like. Which of these people prefers reading a crime novel? And who would rather read a historical book? Let's see.
I like crime novels and detective novels because I like a good suspense story.
I like to read murder, mystery, crime books.
I like to read mainly science fiction books.
I like romantic novels.
Children's stories. I like Noddy. Also like Stephen King's thrillers.
Short stories, novels, and a little history, but not too serious.
I like historical novels. I like books about nature.
I like war and historical books.
I like fiction, most of all, but I do read non-fiction. For example, I'm reading books about theology and philosophy at the moment.
Well, a lot of different kinds of books. Did you spot the answers to our questions? First, who preferred reading a crime novel?
I like crime novels and detective novels because I like a good suspense story.
I like to read murder, mystery, crime books.
So, Keith Harvey and Mrs. Cornish like reading crime novels. And who prefers historical books?
Short stories, novels, and a little history, but not too serious.
I like war and historical books.
So, John and Mr. Cornish prefer historical books.
People read all sorts of books, and of course, they have lots of different reasons for reading. For pleasure,
for study,
for business.
But sometimes, British people read books for another reason. It isn't for pleasure, and it isn't for study, and it isn't for business. No, the British read because they want to avoid conversation, para evitar la conversación.
Yes, if you're reading, you don't have to talk to people. It's time for...
How to be British. Avoiding conversation.
Excellent. That's very funny. Oh, he's a marvellous writer. What's your book like? Is it any good? So's mine. Wonderful book. I can see that you love reading, don't you? So do I. I read all the time. You know, I sometimes get through 2 or 3 books in a year. Have you read any good books lately? You're racing through that one, I see. How many pages have you read? 200?
Look, do you mind? I would like to finish this book.
But of course you would. Fine. I like a good book. But this isn't a good book. It's rubbish. Have you seen any good films lately?
I feel sorry for him. He just wanted to talk.
Well, I feel sorry for the other man who wanted to read his book and didn't want to be interrupted. He used one very useful, very British expression.
Look, do you mind? I would like to finish this book.
Do you mind? Literalmente significa ¿le importa? But here it means stop doing that. Do you mind?
Sorry.
And now we're going over to the newsroom. Listen carefully for news of the Star Chamber and try to answer this question. What does the Star Chamber do?
News, news. First, the headlines. The book world under attack. And writer William Shakespeare writes a new play. But first, the main story. Books are in trouble. For a special report, over to our media correspondent, Sir Sidney Walsingham, a member of the Star Chamber.
Trevor, I'm in St. Paul's courtyard where all the booksellers meet. Many people here are unhappy about the censorship of books by the Star Chamber.
Why is that, Sir Sidney?
Well, Trevor, most authors want to have the freedom to write anything that they want. But we at the Star Chamber look at every book very carefully in case it contains anything against the church or the state.
What happens if you find something that you don't like?
We burn the book.
What if the writer complains?
We burn the writer and the book.
That seems rather cruel.
Perhaps, Trevor, you would like to put your thoughts into writing? I'm sure we at the Star Chamber would find your opinion very interesting.
No, thank you, Sir Sidney. And the other news tonight is that a new play called Romeo and Juliet is being performed at the Globe Theatre. Some people believe that a new young playwright and poet, William Shakespeare, will soon become a very famous writer. Somehow we doubt that. And finally, here's something new on the market. It's a pencil, and it could make life a lot easier for writers everywhere. That's all from That's English News. Good night.
It was an interesting time, wasn't it? The 16th century. Lots of exciting inventions, like the pencil.
Lots of interesting people, like William Shakespeare.
And, of course, the Star Chamber. What is the Star Chamber?
Many people here are unhappy about the censorship of books by the Star Chamber.
Yes, the censorship of books, la censura de libros, that was the Star Chamber's job.
And what sort of things did they censor?
We at the Star Chamber look at every book very carefully in case it contains anything against the church or the state.
In case it contains anything against the church or the state. Contra la Iglesia o el Estado.
Now, we're going to look at one man's private collection of books. Terry Jones is an actor, writer and film producer. You may remember him from the Monty Python films. Most of the books in Terry Jones's library are the same kind.
A lot of these books are all little self-contained worlds. I mean, you've got Chaucer's world and the world of the 14th century, and one of the things that fascinates me is that there it is. It's happened. It can't change. It's just there, and you can read as much as you can and try to get to know it. It's not our world. It's another world, and the similarities fascinate me, but it's always the other worlds that fascinate me. So it's fantasy and myth that fascinate me. It's science fiction. This stuff down here, it's all getting into and more tools of the trade, really. It's sort of dictionaries and all that kind of thing. Of course, the great thing about dictionaries is you don't have to read them all. They're just things that when you want them, you can look them up. Actually, the thing about my bookshelves, looking at them, I realise that really I've hardly read any of the books. I think it's all a bit of a substitute for reading, really. You know, they're mostly reference books and all sorts of interesting books over here. Sex in History, Sex Not in History. And really, there's one other book which I haven't mentioned. That's this book here. It's the Power book. Really, all these books around me, they're all sort of going around, I suppose going into here and then going on to this book. And then I type away and lo and behold, another book comes out. Funny to think that this will kind of end up on one of these shelves. And I'll probably never read it.
Yes, most of the books in Terry Jones's library are reference books, libros de consulta.
Well, we've talked a lot today about different types of books, but before we finish, here's a way you can practice some of those words. Imagine that you're going to give books as presents to 10 people you know. What type of book will you give to each of them?
Make sentences out loud like this. I'm going to give a biography to Vanessa.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give Tony a thriller.
Marvellous. Bye for now.
Bye for now. See you soon.